Chapter 1, A Natural-Born Seer. 1991, London, England. After returning home, Vade Moria carried the fresh ingredients he had bought at the market into the kitchen. He was preparing to make a lavish meal to celebrate his 11th birthday when a loud series of knocks sounded against the window. Knock. 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 Walking over, he found a gray owl relentlessly pecking at the glass. Even more surprisingly, it was clutching a letter in one of its talons. A letter. For me, someone actually wrote to me. Filled with curiosity, Vade opened the window. The owl flew inside, hovered above his head, and released the envelope. It drifted neatly into his hands. The envelope was made of yellow parchment. There was no postage stamp on the front. Instead, a purple wax seal shaped like a shield sat in the center, bearing a large letter H. The shield was divided into 4 quadrants with red, green, yellow, and blue backgrounds. A golden lion occupied the upper left, a silver serpent the upper right, a black badger the lower left, and a bronze eagle the lower right. On the back, his full name and address were written in emerald green ink. Vade stared blankly at the envelope as memories long buried in the depths of his mind resurfaced. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry? It couldn't possibly be that much of a coincidence. Wait, if this was real. Then that meant, with a slight flick of his finger, the envelope floated into the air and opened itself. This was magic, not merely another application of spirituality. As the parchment slowly unfolded, Vade couldn't help feeling that fate had played a rather unfunny joke on him. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry Headmaster, Albus Dumbledore, Order of Merlin, First Class, Supreme Mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards, Chief Warlock of the Wisengamot. Dear Mr. Moria, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Please find enclosed a list of all necessary books and equipment. Term begins on the 1st of September. We await your owl by no later than the 31st of July. Yours sincerely, Professor Minerva McGonagall, Deputy Headmistress. It was the first page. The second contained a list of the uniforms, textbooks, and other equipment required by first-year students. Hoot! The gray owl flapped its wings a few times, urging Vade to look its way. Right. I need to send a reply, give me a moment. Vade left the kitchen and returned half a minute later with paper and a pen. Dear Professor Dumbledore, I have received your letter and am delighted to have the opportunity to study at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. However, I do not know where Hogwarts is located, nor do I know where to purchase the required uniforms, books, and equipment. If possible, could you please arrange for someone to guide me? Vade Moria. After folding and sealing the letter, Vade handed it to the owl. Grasping the envelope in its talons, the owl took flight and disappeared into the distance. For the moment, Vade had lost all interest in cooking. Instead, he sat quietly on the living room sofa, gazing at the Hogwarts acceptance letter. A wonderful birthday present. What an unexpected surprise. 11 years ago, he had been reborn in this unfamiliar city. His parents had died, leaving him to grow up in an orphanage. Although the inheritance they left him was not particularly large, it also included a house. Once he was capable of taking care of himself, the precocious Vade left the orphanage and returned to the home that belonged to him. However, a child could not expect to grow up safely and comfortably by simply living off his inheritance until it ran out. Fortunately, he had brought something with him into this world. A card of blasphemy for the Fool pathway. From Sequence 9 to Sequence 0, gradually transformed from an ordinary person into a beyonder, then a saint, an angel, and finally a god. Even more fortunately, everything he had learned over the years suggested that this world had no true gods, no outer deities watching hungrily from beyond, no maddening ravings, and no approaching apocalypse. For some unknown reason, he had been a Sequence 9 Beyonder since birth. Granting him the Beyonder abilities of a seer, he had mastered astrology, card divination, spirit pendulum divination, spirit vision, and similar forms of divination. He could see things hidden from view and hear faint footsteps, allowing him to make judgments in advance, though his eyesight, hearing, and sense of touch had not improved significantly. Divination was not much of a money-making ability, but that did not mean it could not be used to make money. For example, whenever he bought lottery tickets, he usually won more than he lost. Although the odds of finding money on the street were still low, divination could at least point him in the right direction. Every now and then he could even pose as a mysterious fortune teller and offer advice to doctors and patients. After several years, he had not only avoided exhausting his inheritance, but had also increased his wealth more than tenfold. He had done fairly well for himself. The seer pathway, however, lacked any direct means of confronting enemies. Compared with an ordinary person, a seer was not much stronger. But Vade was different. In addition to the abilities of a seer, he also possessed telekinesis, allowing him to control objects with his thoughts. It was not overwhelmingly powerful, but it gave him at least some means of protecting himself as long as he did not go looking for trouble. A child living in a human society governed by law and morality was unlikely to face much danger. Even so, telekinesis gave him a long-missed sense of security. Every use of the ability consumed a Beyonder's spirituality. Now, however, it seemed that what it consumed might not be a Beyonder's spirituality alone, but rather a wizard's magic, or perhaps a mixture of magic and spirituality. That was both good news and bad news. The good news was that his control over magic far surpassed that of an ordinary wizard. The bad news was that the strength of his magic was now completely tied to his sequence. A Sequence 9 seer possessed magical power roughly equivalent to that of a first-year Hogwarts student. Even simple spells would drain his magic after only a dozen or so casts in the wizarding world. That placed him among the lowest level of cannon fodder, the sort that could be wiped out in droves by a single spell. There was even worse news. The card of blasphemy fused with his soul had shown no change for 11 years. It had remained on the Sequence 9 page without ever turning to in other words, unless something unexpected happened. He would never have the opportunity to advance to a higher sequence in his lifetime. But this Hogwarts acceptance letter had given him hope. The spiritual intuition that had lain dormant within him for 11 years trembled ever so slightly the instant he touched the envelope. That unmistakable reaction was a clear sign. Living comfortably as a wealthy man and peacefully waiting out the rest of his life was not a bad future. But becoming a wizard, or even a god, that would open up an entirely wider world. A smile slowly spread across Vade's face. He stood and walked toward the full-length mirror. His black, slightly tousled hair, pale blue eyes, and handsome features looked no different from usual. Only one thing had changed. His eyes now shone with unmistakable anticipation. Chapter 2 Guidance. 2 days later, Vade had just finished breakfast and was preparing to go out for a walk when the doorbell suddenly rang. Vade paused for a moment, then immediately realized that the guide from Hogwarts had arrived. He quickly opened the door and saw a witch. With a kind, gentle smile. She wore dark green robes, square spectacles, and a black pointed hat. "Mr. Vade Moria? That's me. And you are?" "Minerva McGonagall, Professor of Transfiguration at Hogwarts and head of Gryffindor House." Vade was surprised. It was not that he had never heard of this professor, but he had not expected a deputy headmistress to personally serve as his guide. Wasn't that a little extravagant? "Hello, Professor McGonagall. Please come in and have a seat." Vade stepped aside and gestured for her to enter, doing his best to appear polite. McGonagall smiled and nodded before walking into the house. She sat down on the sofa in the living room. Vade poured her a cup of hot tea, then sat across from her like an obedient student. "There's no need to be so nervous, Mr. Moria." "I'm sorry, Professor McGonagall. This is my first time meeting a witch, so I can't help feeling a little excited," Vade said, deliberately putting on an excited expression. "It was only a few days ago that I learned the strange abilities I occasionally displayed were actually magic, and that there were many others like me in this world. That I certainly didn't expect you to come personally and guide me. It is quite necessary. Every year, Hogwarts sends professors to guide young witches and wizards raised by muggles, ensuring that no student is overlooked." "Muggles?" "That is what ordinary people without magical ability are called in the British wizarding world. However, you are a half-blood wizard. Your father was a wizard, while your mother was a muggle." "I never met either of them. They died when I was born." Vade smiled and shook his head, pretending not to care. McGonagall's expression froze, and an inexplicable sense of guilt rose within her. What had she just done? She had brought up an orphan's parents and reopened a child's old wounds. "Professor McGonagall, can we leave now? To be honest, I'm really looking forward to it." "Of course. Have you prepared everything you need?" "I have, although I'm not sure whether it will be enough." Vade asked her to wait a moment, then ran upstairs and returned with 2 heavy gold bars. After receiving Hogwarts' reply, he had converted most of his assets into gold, leaving only £1,000 for his daily expenses in the Muggle world. It was not that pounds could not be exchanged for wizarding currency at Gringotts, but those greedy goblins clearly preferred gold. "That will certainly be enough." McGonagall nodded approvingly. Still, I suggest that you spend carefully. You will need to purchase new textbooks and equipment every school year. Hogwarts can also arrange loans for new students from families with financial difficulties, should you need one. That won't be necessary, Professor McGonagall. I don't like the feeling of owing money. McGonagall respected his decision. An orphan without parents must have endured many hardships and grievances to grow up this far. It was only natural for him to have his own views. Then let us be on our way, Mr. Moria. We still have plenty of time today. We should be able to purchase everything you need for the start of term in Diagon Alley. Please stay close to me and make sure you don't get lost. All right. Vade locked the door and followed McGonagall. The two of them walked for more than half an hour before entering an underground station and boarding a train. After leaving the station, they made their way through the bustling crowd and stopped in front of a pub. The Leaky Cauldron was wedged between a bookshop and a record shop. Its entrance was narrow and grimy, yet the passing pedestrians seemed unable to notice it, never even glancing in its direction. Do you find it strange? A little. Can only witches and wizards see it? It has been enchanted. Muggles instinctively overlook this place. McGonagall did not answer directly. She pushed open the door and led Vade inside. Compared with the surrounding shops, the Leaky Cauldron seemed remarkably old-fashioned. It was still lit by candles, leaving the interior rather dim. Most of the patrons wore robes similar to McGonagall's, while others were dressed in even more unusual styles. Some were drinking, some were smoking, and others were chatting. Combined with the classical music, the pub was exceptionally noisy. Good morning, Professor McGonagall, the landlord greeted her. You seem quite busy lately. I only saw you bring a young girl through here a few days ago. Guiding young witches and wizards is very important. McGonagall gently patted Vade on the shoulder, then led him past the bar and into a small courtyard behind the pub. Apart from several dustbins, the courtyard held only a few stubborn weeds growing in the corners. McGonagall walked over to the brick wall beside the dustbins. 3 bricks up, then 2 across, and then, she tapped several bricks with her wand. The entire wall began to tremble. The bricks rearranged themselves, twisting and sliding apart to both sides until they formed a wide archway. Beyond the archway lay a winding cobbled street whose end could not be seen. This is Diagon Alley. You can purchase most of the things a witch or wizard might need here, including, but not limited to, everything on the Hogwarts supply list. Vade looked at the old-fashioned buildings, which were completely different from anything in the outside world, and at the witches and wizards filling the street in robes and pointed hats. His eyes widened despite himself. Although he had been mentally prepared, he still could not suppress his amazement when he saw it with his own eyes. It is always this lively before the start of term. Of course, it is usually quite lively as well, McGonagall said with a smile. First, we need to visit Gringotts and exchange your money. Wizarding currency is different from Muggle money. It consists of gold galleons, silver sickles, and bronze nuts. 1 galleon is worth 17 sickles, and 1 sickle is worth 29 nuts. McGonagall explained as they walked. That conversion system is far too complicated. Couldn't they have made it decimal? Goblins enjoy making things difficult for wizards with such conversions, but it is not much of a problem once you become accustomed to it. They passed cauldron shops, owl shops, ice cream parlors, apothecaries, and all manner of stalls both large and small before stopping in front of a tall, snow-white building. A flight of white stone steps led up to a pair of gleaming bronze doors. Beside them stood a goblin dressed in a scarlet and gold uniform. The goblin was only as tall as a human child. He had a shrewd, greedy-looking face, sparse hair and a thin beard, a long pointed nose, pointed ears and slender, sharp fingers. Chapter 3, Choosing a Wand. Beyond the bronze doors was an entrance hall, followed by a second set of doors made of silver. A warning was engraved upon the doors. Enter, stranger, but take heed of what awaits the sin of greed. For those who take but do not earn, must pay most dearly in their turn. So if you seek beneath our floors a treasure that was never yours, thief, you have been warned, beware of finding more than treasure there. Vade scoffed at the warning. It was well written, but ultimately amounted to little more than empty words. Those without the ability to rob a bank would be restrained by common sense. Those with the ability would have no need to rob one. There were plenty of faster ways to make money, and turning to crime would hardly be worth the consequences. As for anyone determined to rob the bank, a warning carved into the doors would not stop them. 2 goblins stood on either side of the silver doors. Beyond them lay a vast marble hall. Behind rows of long counters, hundreds of goblins sat on high stools, weighing coins, examining gemstones, recording figures in ledgers, and stamping documents. Countless doors lined the hall, while goblins guided customers in and out. McGonagall led Vade to an unoccupied goblin. Mr. Moria would like to exchange some money. The goblin glanced at McGonagall before turning his attention to Vade. Muggle banknotes? No, these. Vade placed the 2 gold bars on the counter. A greedy gleam immediately appeared in the goblin's eyes, but he promptly brought out a set of scales and several testing instruments to assess the value of the gold. Sir, these 2 gold bars can be exchanged for 600 galleons. Vade looked at McGonagall. Only after she gave a slight nod did he feel somewhat reassured. He had his doubts about the goblin's honesty. Who knew whether they might take advantage of him simply because he was young? Professor, roughly how many galleons will everything on the Hogwarts list cost? Professor McGonagall considered the question for a moment. Less than 100 galleons. Board and lodging at Hogwarts are free, and you should have little need to spend money during the school year. Then I'll keep 200 galleons. The things on the school list can't be the only items worth buying in Diagon Alley. That is true, but you should not spend carelessly. Of course. Vade nodded solemnly, then turned to the goblin. I'll keep 200 galleons. Can the remaining 400 be deposited here? Gringotts provides a private vault for every witch or wizard who wishes to deposit money. However, the process is rather complicated and will take some time. Vade turned to McGonagall without saying a word, but his meaning was obvious. Very well. Please follow me. The goblin led them through one of the doors and out of the hall to complete the complicated formalities. More than 2 hours later, Vade received a small golden key. He had deposited only 400 galleons, so he was hardly an important client. His vault was also one of the most basic kind, nothing like those protected by elaborate traps or guarded by dragons. Even so, Vade was perfectly satisfied. The vaults of Gringotts served as the banks of the wizarding world, and both their reputation and security were reliable. For a young wizard with no family, few connections, and little strength, depositing his money in a bank was unquestionably the sensible choice. At the very least, he would not have to worry about it being stolen. Vault 996, the goblin said. Whenever you wish to withdraw money, simply bring the key to Gringotts. The corner of Vade's eye twitched. 996. For some reason, the number felt like a joke at the expense of honest working people. Suppressing the urge to complain, Vade accepted a pouch from the goblin. It contained 200 gold galleons. They left Gringotts and returned to the street outside. Under Professor McGonagall's guidance, Vade first visited a shop on the southern side of Diagon Alley, Ollivander's. From the outside, the shop looked small and shabby. A sign above the entrance read, Ollivander's, makers of fine wands since 382 BC. A wand is extremely important to a witch or wizard, McGonagall explained. It is the instrument through which they channel their magic. Does that mean a wizard cannot use magic without a wand? Vade asked curiously. No. Some witches and wizards are capable of wandless magic, however it requires intense scent ration and extraordinary skill, making it extremely difficult. A wand guides a wizard's magical power, focusing it and allowing them to achieve more complex effects. Vade understood. Wands were indeed important. Even if 2 wizards of equal ability were both capable of wandless magic, the one carrying a wand would undoubtedly hold the advantage over the one without one. The 2 of them entered the shop, and a tinkling bell rang out, seemingly announcing the arrival of customers. The shop was very small. A long bench and several chairs stood in one corner, while the walls were lined with narrow boxes stacked almost to the ceiling. Good afternoon, Professor McGonagall, and to the young wizard preparing for Hogwarts. Ollivander climbed down from a ladder and studied Vade. Mr. Ollivander, Mr. Moria requires a wand. Naturally. Ollivander smiled, then picked up a measuring tape from the table. Mr. Moria, which is your wand hand? My right. Very well. Raise your arm and I shall take your measurements. Vade did as instructed. He had assumed Ollivander would simply measure the length of his arm. Instead, the wandmaker also measured from his shoulder to the floor, from his knee to his armpit, the circumference of his head, and even the distance between his nostrils. Vade wisely chose not to ask any questions. After all, the wizarding world differed greatly from the Muggle world. Besides, Professor McGonagall showed no reaction, so this was clearly Ollivander's standard procedure. Once he had gathered all the necessary measurements, Ollivander put the tape away and began searching through the shelves, pulling out one long box after another. Try this one. Ollivander removed a black wand from its box. Holly and unicorn tail hair, 12 inches. Give it a gentle wave. Vade picked up the wand and lightly waved it. A faint breeze passed through the shop, but nothing else seemed to happen. Not quite right. Ollivander took the wand back and replaced it with another. Ebony and dragon heartstring, 9 inches. Vade waved the second wand, white light burst from its tip, followed by a faint arc of electricity. More particular than I expected. Ollivander seemed slightly excited. But no matter. The wand chooses the wizard. Every wand is unique, and somewhere in this shop, we are certain to find the one best suited to you. However, Vade tried one wand after another until his arm began to ache, yet none of them managed to satisfy Ollivander. Yes, Ollivander was the one who remained unsatisfied. The wandmaker only grew more excited, as though finding the perfect match for a particularly difficult customer gave him a special sense of fulfillment. Try this one. Acacia and phoenix feather, 9.5 inches, very selective but also exceptionally loyal. It will refuse to serve anyone other than its owner. With little hope remaining, Vade gave the wand a wave. Unsurprisingly, it failed as well. Ollivander's interest only deepened. He was about to return to the shelves for another batch of wands when Vade called out to stop him. Wait, Mr. Ollivander. Could you let me choose one myself? Chapter 4, An Intriguing Divination. Choose one yourself? Ollivander stared at Vade in surprise. Young wizard, I understand your curiosity, but you know nothing about wands. Wands are made from different woods and cores, and there are countless possible combinations. Yet every wand is unique. Even wands made from the same wood and core will have subtle differences. I may not understand wands, but I do understand divination. McGonagall's interest was immediately piqued. Mr. Moria, you know how to perform divination? A little, Vade replied modestly. Exactly how much counted as a little was a matter of perspective. You intend to use divination to find your first wand? Ollivander asked thoughtfully. Mr. Moria, you are the first wizard I have ever known to try such a thing. Very well then. Let us see what happens. Vade took a deep breath and calmed himself as much as possible. He then removed the silver chain hanging around his neck. A transparent crystal dangled from its end. He extended his left hand and held the silver chain so that the crystal hung straight down toward the floor. After a moment of complete stillness, the crystal swayed slightly and indicated a direction. Vade walked to one of the shelves and repeated the process. After using the spirit pendulum several times to eliminate the wands unsuitable for him, Vade finally removed 2 boxes and placed them on the table. Are you certain these 2 wands are suited to you? Ollivander's breathing had quickened slightly, and his pale eyes were filled with excitement. Not entirely. Divination is not infallible. Ollivander opened the first box. Inside lay a silver-gray wand. Vine wood with a phoenix feather core, 11 inches. Vine wands are among the less common varieties. Their owners nearly always seek a greater purpose, possess vision beyond the ordinary, and frequently astonish those who believe they know them best. Phoenix feather wands are capable of the greatest range of magic, but they are highly selective when choosing their owners. They are also among the most difficult wands to tame and personalize. Vade accepted the wand from Ollivander and gave it a practiced wave. A scarlet glow appeared at its tip, releasing an invisible yet pleasantly warm breeze. What an intriguing method of divination. This wand is exceptionally well suited to you. Mr. Ollivander, what about the other wand? McGonagall asked. That is where things become truly remarkable. Ollivander opened the second box, revealing a pale gray wand resting quietly inside. This was made by my father. It is also 11 inches long and made of vine wood, but its core is a thunderbird tail feather. Wands with thunderbird tail feather cores are difficult to master, but exceptionally powerful. Vade accepted the wand, and his fingertips went numb for an instant. As he gave it a wave, a thumb-sized spark of golden electricity burst from the tip. It crackled in the air before quickly fading into nothing. Ollivander could not help clapping his hands. Excellent! Both of these wands have chosen you. I believe you are destined to accomplish great things. Vade thought Ollivander had an excellent eye for people. Be common. GA God would certainly count as a great accomplishment, even though Vade had yet to take the first step toward it. Unless he unraveled the secret of the card of blasphemy, however, there would be a firm limit to what he could achieve in this life. Well then, Mr. Moria, which wand will you choose? Can I have both? Ollivander fell silent for several seconds. You can, but I would not recommend it. The wand chooses the wizard and the wizard must master the wand. Mastering one wand is obviously easier than mastering two. For most witches and wizards, a single wand can last for many years. Anything you could accomplish with two wands can also be done with one, often more easily. Perhaps you're overthinking it. I only want a spare. Vade kept the thought to himself. I would still like both of them. Very well. A wand costs 7 galleons, so the two will cost 14. Vade opened the pouch filled with gold galleons and reached inside. The instant his fingers touched the coins, the card of blasphemy within his mind suddenly released an invisible pulse. At that moment, Vade understood. The condition required to activate the card of blasphemy was not complicated. In fact, it was almost absurdly simple. Money, more precisely magical currency, like the gold galleons currently clutched in his hand. No wonder the card of blasphemy had shown no reaction over the past 11 years. Before entering the wizarding world, he had never had the opportunity to come into contact with magical currency. Fate's joke was not funny in the slightest. Vade felt like a complete clown. He seriously suspected that if he drank the Sequence 8 potion now, he would immediately digest a substantial portion of it. Vade counted out 14 galleons, paid for the wands, and took both of them with him. After leaving Ollivander's, the two walked along the bustling street outside. I had no idea you possessed a talent for divination. A meaningful smile appeared on McGonagall's face. Professor Trelawney may be delighted to hear about you. She teaches divination. Shouldn't every witch and wizard possess some talent for divination? Vade asked, feigning confusion. No. Even in the wizarding world, those with a genuine talent for divination are extremely rare. True seers capable of making prophecies are rarer still. Mr. Moria, have you considered which house you would like to join? Vade shook his head. Hogwarts had 4 houses: Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin. Personally, he was more inclined toward Hufflepuff. The house was relatively peaceful and uncompetitive, making it ideal for someone who wanted to keep his head down and quietly build his strength. However, he could not say that aloud. This was supposedly his first day in the wizarding world, so how could he possibly know so much about Hogwarts? McGonagall also realized this and began explaining the 4 Hogwarts houses to him. She then tactfully revealed her true intention. Should it interest you, you might consider Gryffindor. I am certain you would make many friends there. This young wizard showed considerable promise. As head of Gryffindor House, she naturally did not wish to let him slip away. Besides, he was an orphan. The companionship of friends would ease his loneliness and provide a much-needed source of warmth and support as he grew up. Realizing that McGonagall was trying to recruit him, Vade felt strangely guilty. There was no chance he was going to Gryffindor. None whatsoever. It was far too lively, and joining it would make it much too easy to become involved with the boy who lived. Who knew when he might be dragged into one of his adventures? Thank you, Professor. I'll give it careful consideration. Leaving the subject behind, McGonagall took Vade to Madame Malkin's Robes for All Occasions, where he purchased several sets of school robes. They bought his first-year textbooks at Flourish and Blott's, then visited other shops for a cauldron, protective gloves, a winter cloak, a telescope, scales, and the rest of his required equipment. Vade checked the Hogwarts supply list. He had purchased everything he needed, only a pet remained. Chapter 5, Activating the Card of Blasphemy. Professor McGonagall. Standing outside the magical menagerie, Vade glanced at the line on the school list that read, "Students may also bring an owl or a cat or a toad." He then looked at the rats, ravens, lizards, and other creatures inside the shop. Does Hogwarts only allow students to bring owls, cats, or toads? Those are merely the recommended choices. In truth, you may bring any pet as long as it is not dangerous and does not interfere with your studies or daily life. Can I choose not to bring one? Vade asked somewhat awkwardly. Is there nothing you like? McGonagall asked in surprise. I've never kept a pet before. It seems like a lot of trouble. Magical pets are not that troublesome. You could choose an owl. It would make sending letters more convenient. McGonagall suddenly remembered that Vade lived alone. You could use it to send letters to your friends in the future. Perhaps another time, Vade declined tactfully. I don't think I need one right now. Very well. The sky was beginning to darken when McGonagall escorted Vade out of Diagon Alley. They passed through the brick wall and returned to the leaky cauldron. By then there were very few customers left inside. You can either return home or stay here for the night. Stay at the pub? There are rooms for rent upstairs. Tom the landlord shrugged. They are intended for witches and wizards who cannot make it home in time. How much do they cost? The price depends on the room. Between 6 and 17 sickles with meals included. Vade weighed the pouch containing more than 100 remaining gold galleons and decided that he could afford to stay until the start of term. There was no one waiting for him at home anyway. It made little difference where he stayed. Remaining at the leaky cauldron would also make it easier for him to learn about the wizarding world and gather information. I'll stay for one night then. Vade placed a galleon on the counter. Your best room. Tom gave Vade a second look, apparently surprised that the boy was such a generous customer. McGonagall shook her head in amusement and reminded him, the 1st of September, King's Cross Station, platform 9 3/4. Make sure you do not miss the train. I understand, Professor. Follow me, young wizard. Tom pocketed the galleon and led the way upstairs. Vade followed him to room 2. The room was built almost entirely of wood. It contained a bed, a fireplace, a table and chairs, a wardrobe and 2 windows, one overlooking Charing Cross Road and the other Diagon Alley. Most importantly, it also had a private washroom. After setting down the bags and parcels he had been carrying, Vade closed the door, drew the curtains and sprawled across the bed with his arms and legs spread wide. After resting for a while, he took a galleon from his pocket and focused his attention on the card of blasphemy deep within his mind. The card of blasphemy had fused with his soul, and no magic could separate it from him. It also granted Vade a certain degree of concealment. Even legilimency could not pry into the memories protected by it. However, it was only today that he had finally learned how to truly activate it. Vade flicked the galleon into the air with his finger. It rang with the distinctive chime of money spinning several times before falling back into his hand. With a thought, the galleon suddenly vanished from his palm. The card of blasphemy trembled almost imperceptibly, then fell still once more. It wasn't enough. Vade gave a bitter smile, grabbed a handful of galleons from his pouch, and continued offering them. When he sacrificed the 10th galleon, the card of blasphemy finally reacted. It began to tremble violently, forming an invisible vortex around itself as it frantically absorbed Vade's magic. This placed a considerable burden on an 11-year-old wizard, or rather a sequence 9 beyonder, but it was still within his limits. The card of blasphemy then became three-dimensional, transforming into a thin book. A page slowly turned, revealing an image of a clown wearing painted makeup, accompanied by a description. Sequence 8, Clown. Possesses extraordinary coordination and balance, precise control over the body, exceptional agility and speed, and a respectable degree of physical strength. Particularly skilled in technical combat, capable of effectively controlling facial expressions and body language, making lies easier for others to believe. The potion formula is as follows. Main ingredients: 1 crystallized horn from an adult Hornasus gray mountain goat, substitute, unicorn horn 10 galleons, 1 complete human-faced rose 10 galleons, supplementary ingredients: 80 milliliters of purified water 1 galleon, 5 drops of mandrake juice 1 galleon, 7 grams of black-edged sunflower powder 1 galleon, 10 grams of golden cloak grass powder 1 galleon, 3 drops of hemlock juice 1 galleon. After reading it, Vade stared blankly for a moment before shaking his head with a helpless smile. The card of blasphemy had conveyed 3 pieces of information to him, 1 good, 1 bad, and 1 that was neither particularly good nor bad. The good news was that the card of blasphemy had adapted rather well to this world. Both the main and supplementary ingredients had possible substitutes. As long as Vade had encountered a suitable material before, the card would identify it for him. He had happened to see a unicorn horn in an apothecary while exploring Diagon Alley earlier that day. Out of curiosity, he had picked it up and examined it. 1 horn seemed to cost 21 galleons. Even if he could not find a substitute, it did not matter. He could obtain the required ingredient by sacrificing enough money. Whether doing so was worthwhile, however, would depend on the circumstances. Otherwise, he might easily end up paying far more than necessary. Take the unicorn horn, for example. The price listed by the card of blasphemy was less than half its actual market price. The supplementary ingredients, on the other hand, were certainly not as expensive as the card claimed. 80 milliliters of purified water could be purchased for a few bronze nuts, yet the card demanded an entire gold galleon, more than 100 times its proper value. The bad news was that everything was far too expensive. The potion formulas themselves had to be purchased, and both the formulas and ingredients became 10 times more expensive with each advancing sequence. The Sequence 8 potion formula cost 10 galleons. Each main ingredient cost 10 galleons, while each supplementary ingredient cost 1 galleon. The Sequence 7 formula, however, would cost 100 galleons. Each main ingredient would also cost 100 galleons, while each supplementary ingredient would cost 10. Following that pattern, the higher the sequence, the greater the cost. With his current wealth, Sequence 7 was the absolute highest he could possibly reach. Sequence 6 was not even worth considering. A Sequence 7 Beyonder would probably only be comparable to an average adult wizard in the magical world. Put simply, he would still be little more than an ordinary bystander. He had to find a way to make money. Otherwise, being trapped at that level would be unbearably frustrating. The final piece of news, neither good nor bad, was that he could only unlock the next sequence after completely digesting the potion of his current sequence. How ridiculous, Vade muttered helplessly. I never expected to start worrying about money on my very first day in the wizarding world. For a moment, the idea of robbing a bank crossed his mind. Gringotts was not even particularly far away. It was practically tempting him into a life of crime. All he had to do was pull off one major robbery and perhaps he would earn himself a place in Azkaban. Forget it. I'm still young. I can't start down the path of crime. Money may be necessary, but it is not urgently needed at the moment. Advancing to Sequence 8 comes first. Chapter 6, Grindelwald's Vision. Nurmengard, Austria. A towering fortress rose against the bleak landscape, a place of darkness and dread. Above its entrance, a single motto had been carved into the stone, for the greater good. The wizarding prison had stood abandoned for half a century. Now it held only one prisoner, Gellert Grindelwald, the first Dark Lord. The legendary wizard who had once plunged all of Europe into bloodshed now resembled a man nearing the end of his life. His hair was thin, his body frail, and he looked as though a strong gust of wind might knock him over. He was imprisoned in a room at the very top of the tower. It contained nothing but a stone bed and a tattered blanket. Even the window was little more than a narrow slit cut into the black stone. Just as he was preparing to sleep, he suddenly sensed something. His mismatched blue and gold eyes lit up sharply, and his gaze seemed to pierce the walls as he stared toward the storm-darkened sky outside. Thunder rumbled. A flash of lightning shone through the narrow opening, briefly illuminating the darkness of the room. Grindelwald's body suddenly began to tremble violently as unknown images surfaced within his eyes. Drip, drip. Blood flowed from his eyes and nostrils, falling onto the hard, freezing floor. After an unknown amount of time, he slowly raised his head. An indescribable excitement had appeared on his previously numb face. The fool. Hogwarts, the future has changed. Everything is different now. Grindelwald rose to his feet, as though new life had been breathed into his frail body. His appearance had barely changed, yet his entire presence was different. The air of lifelessness surrounding him had vanished. Gertch. Pop, with a muffled sound, an elderly house elf appeared inside the room. Master, you called for Gertch? Paper and a quill. I need to write a letter. A letter? Gertch's voice began to tremble. Master, have you forgotten? None of the letters you send to him can leave this place. You can only reply after one of his letters arrives. Grindelwald sighed. He had forgotten how long it had been since he had last written a letter. Never mind. Bring me my wand. Master, have you finally decided to leave? Gertch became so excited that his words tumbled over one another. This is wonderful. Gertch always knew this prison could never hold you. No. Not yet, Grindelwald replied. It was as though cold water had been poured over the house elf's excitement. He quickly calmed down. Gertch bowed to Grindelwald before disappearing from the room. Several seconds later, he returned and handed Grindelwald a black wand. Grindelwald took it. An extraordinarily powerful surge of magic erupted from his frail body, blasting the entire wall apart. Shattered stones fell from high above. Grindelwald spread his arms and allowed the fierce wind and rain outside to lash against his body. Master. Gertch looked at him anxiously. This is not good for your health. You should return to the manor and rest. It is much warmer there. I told you not yet. Grindelwald lightly waved his wand, and the shattered wall rapidly repaired itself. He then tossed the wand back to Gurch. You may leave. He will be here shortly. Yes, master. Sure enough, not long after Gurch departed, another elderly figure arrived at Nurmengard. Dumbledore wore a traveling cloak, and droplets of rain clung to his long silver hair and beard. The wall parted on its own, forming an archway that he walked straight inside and stopped before Grindelwald. It has been decades since we last saw each other, Dumbledore, Grindelwald said hoarsely, though a trace of inexplicable relief lay beneath his voice. I thought you were dead when I sensed that the prison had been damaged. Were you disappointed? No. I am relieved that you are still alive. Then again, there is no one in this world capable of killing you. Dumbledore spoke casually, but he understood Grindelwald's abilities better than almost anyone. This prison had never truly been capable of holding him. Grindelwald had remained in this cell for decades partly as a form of self-punishment, but even more because he had accepted the outcome of their duel. Tell me, what was so urgent that you had to summon me in this manner? Dumbledore did not waste time on pleasantries. He and Grindelwald had parted ways decades ago. Although they had remained in contact, reminiscing about the past was best avoided. If he allowed himself to feel sympathy for Grindelwald, he was not certain he could keep his emotions under control. The consequences would be far more terrifying than anything Voldemort could cause. Compared with the first Dark Lord, the second was little more than an inexperienced recruit. I saw a new future. Dumbledore's expression immediately became serious. What kind of future? A person. Someone capable of standing alongside Merlin, perhaps even surpassing him. Someone who could influence the entire wizarding world, perhaps even the course of the whole world. Grindelwald gave him a meaningful smile. Perhaps he will succeed in realizing the dream we once failed to achieve. Then that would be truly terrifying. Grindelwald burst into laughter and nearly lost his breath. Dumbledore, after all these years you still insist on worrying about disasters that have not yet happened. Gellert, I am not joking. Very well, very well. Grindelwald coughed twice. Then you should guide him. Let us hope that one day he becomes the kind of person you want him to be. However, Dumbledore, your record as a teacher is hardly reassuring. The future may not unfold as you wish. A student? Dumbledore immediately caught the crucial point. You mean he will become one of my students? It is merely a possibility. Dumbledore fell silent for a moment. What exactly did you see? A figure shrouded in dense mist, high above all others, detached from the world, calmly observing the world in which we live. You know that is not what I was asking. Of course I do, but look. Grindelwald brushed aside the white hair covering his forehead, revealing the eye beneath it. Dumbledore could not help drawing in a sharp breath. The white of that eye was almost completely flooded with blood, while more than a third of its golden iris had turned a lifeless gray white. I wanted to know who he was as well, but my eye could not see through the mist. He merely glanced at me, and I nearly went blind. Dumbledore's heart grew heavier. He had lived for more than a century and believed that little could disturb his composure, yet reality had struck him a heavy blow. That he knew Grindelwald's strength better than anyone. There were very few people in the entire wizarding world capable of matching him, yet a single glance cast across time had forced him back. Even taking Grindelwald's weakened condition into account, it revealed just how serious the situation was. The wizarding world was about to witness the rise of another genius seen only once in a century, perhaps even once in a millennium. With the right guidance, such a person could become a blessing to the entire world. With the wrong guidance, he could become a catastrophe unlike anything the world had ever known. Were there any other clues? He was watching Hogwarts, and he is the fool. Do not ask me what the fool means. All I felt was an instinctive sense of reverence. I understand that I failed to properly guide the last once-in-a-century genius, and he became Voldemort. I will not make the same mistake this time. If you need my assistance, simply write me a letter, Grindelwald said teasingly. I may have no experience educating students, but at least I would not turn him into a deranged murderer. That will not be necessary. Dumbledore turned and walked away. After he stepped outside, the archway slowly closed, once again becoming a solid stone wall. Chapter 7, Sequence 8 Clown. Diagon Alley, the Leaky Cauldron. After breakfast, Vade changed into his wizarding robes, took the silver-gray wand made of vine wood and phoenix feather and left his room. His task for the day was simple: explore and shop. First, he needed to gather the ingredients required for the clown potion. If the prices were reasonable, he would buy them. If not, he would sacrifice money to the card of blasphemy in exchange for them. Second, he intended to examine as many magical ingredients as possible and search for substitutes that could be used in the potions of higher sequences. Perhaps because it was still early, there were not many customers in the pub. Tom, the landlord, was wiping glasses behind the bar when he greeted him. "How did you sleep last night?" "Not badly. However, Tom, the food here isn't really to my taste. This is a pub, not a restaurant. For a proper meal, you can try the cafe, the ice cream parlor, or the fried food shop. Those are some of the better-known places, though you can also try one of the other restaurants." "I think I'll pass on experimenting. Could I use your kitchen instead?" "You can, but you'll have to pay for the ingredients." Vade nodded and tossed a prepared pouch onto the counter. The crisp clinking of coins rang out clearly. Tom opened it, and a golden gleam reflected in his eyes. "This is far too much." 50 gold galleons, Vade said. "I intend to stay here until the start of term. That should cover the accommodation and the use of the kitchen." "Very well." Tom took out a ledger and recorded the payment. "I'll keep track of the expenses. Any excess will be refunded, and you can pay the difference if necessary." "Understood." Vade left the pub and stepped onto the main street of Diagon Alley. Taking a breath of the fresh morning air, he set his sights on the apothecary and headed toward it. The shop reeked of rotting food, but it was still the place in Diagon Alley most likely to carry the ingredients he needed. Vade's gaze swept over the barrels of slimy substances arranged on the floor. Suppressing his discomfort, he inspected and touched them one by one. Bat spleens, caterpillar slime, snail mucus. Not one of them drew the attention of the card of blasphemy, leaving Vade somewhat disappointed. The clerk behind the counter noticed what he was doing. Every year, young witches and wizards came in curious about potion ingredients. But this was the first time he had seen someone inspect every item individually. "May I help you?" Vade paused, then somewhat sheepishly took a sheet of parchment from his pocket. "These are the ingredients I need." The clerk carefully read through the list, and his eyebrows rose slightly. A human-faced rose, purified water, mandrake juice, black-edged sunflower powder, golden cloak grass powder, and hemlock juice. "Is there a problem?" "We have everything except the human-faced rose." Finding 5 of the 6 ingredients was already remarkably fortunate. Vade muttered to himself before asking, "Where might I find a human-faced rose?" "I don't know. You could try your luck in Nocturne Alley. However, I would not recommend going there. Dark wizards are everywhere, and there is no guarantee you would come back alive." Vade gave him a strained smile. The blunt truth always had a way of hurting. Nocturne Alley was far too dangerous for him. He had no intention of entering it before reaching Sequence 7, or perhaps even Sequence 6. "How much does a human-faced rose usually cost?" "About 3 galleons, I believe. It is magically cultivated, but aside from frightening people, its medicinal value is only slightly better than that of an ordinary wild rose. It does have an exceptionally long shelf life, though." After hearing the price, Vade immediately abandoned the idea. There was no reason to risk entering Nocturne Alley merely to save a little money. That he would obtain the main ingredients for the Sequence 8 potion from the card of blasphemy instead. Altogether, it would still save him 4 galleons. "I'll purchase the other 5 ingredients. 100 milliliters of purified water, and 1 small vial of each juice and powder." "Of course, sir." The clerk returned to the counter, gathered the 5 bottles and jars, and packed them together. 20 silver sickles. Vade paid with 2 galleons, and the clerk gave him 14 sickles in change. After completing the purchase, Vade did not leave immediately. Instead, he turned his attention to the jars of herbs, dried roots, and brightly colored powders arranged along the walls, as well as the bundles of feathers, strings of fangs, and furry claws hanging from the ceiling. Somewhere among them there might be an ingredient he needed, however. After spending more than an hour examining everything until even he had grown tired, he still found nothing useful. Unwilling to give up, Vade shifted his attention to the neatly packaged bottles and jars displayed on the counter. Nettle oil, dragon blood, horclump juice, wormwood infusion. When his hand touched a dark blue glass bottle, the card of blasphemy finally reacted. The liquid inside could replace one of the supplementary ingredients for the Sequence 7 potion. Lethe River Water. Vade glanced at the label and was immediately intrigued. With a name like Lethe River Water, it had to be something unusual. How much is this? 4 galleons. It is an ingredient used in the Forgetfulness Potion. A sequence 7 supplementary ingredient would cost 10 galleons through the Card of Blasphemy, so buying this would save him 6. After thinking for a moment, Vade paid 4 galleons and purchased the bottle of Lethe River Water. Once he left the apothecary, he returned directly to the leaky cauldron and went upstairs to his room. After closing the door, Vade took out all the ingredients and arranged them across the floor. He then reached out to the Card of Blasphemy within his mind and sacrificed 20 galleons in exchange for the 2 main ingredients of the Sequence 8 potion. The crystallized horn of an adult Hornaceous gray mountain goat was about the size of his palm. It was entirely translucent, with light flowing across its surface and layers of strange patterns within. The human-faced rose was blue, with red lines running across its petals. The markings connected to form what looked like a human face with its mouth stretched wide open. Ha ha ha. Boo-hoo-hoo. Illusory laughter and sobbing overlapped as specks of gray light floated through the air. Vade took a deep breath, brought out the cauldron he had purchased the previous day and began brewing the potion. First, he poured 80 milliliters of purified water into the cauldron. He then added the correct amounts of mandrake juice, black-edged sunflower powder, golden cloak grass powder, and hemlock juice in sequence. He carried out every step with extreme care, unwilling to make even the slightest mistake. The liquid inside the cauldron showed no obvious change. Only a small amount of powder remained floating on its surface. Vade waited for a moment, then lightly flicked his wand. The human-faced rose floated above the cauldron and slowly descended into it. Sizzle. As the rose dissolved, it produced a faint sizzling sound, while the illusory laughter grew increasingly distinct. Vade swallowed nervously and waved his wand again, sending the crystallized horn of the Hornaceous gray mountain goat into the cauldron. The laughter abruptly vanished. The specks of gray light rapidly contracted and disappeared into the cauldron. The liquid inside began shifting between gold, red, and yellow, yet remained exceptionally clear. Bubbles surged through it like a carbonated drink. Vade poured the entire potion into a glass. He then took out his silver chain, gripped it tightly in his left hand, and used spirit pendulum divination to determine whether the potion had been successfully brewed. When the transparent crystal swung sharply to one side, Vade let out a breath of relief. He raised the glass and drank every last drop. Chapter 8, Dumbledore's List. Bitter, unbearably bitter, the moment the potion touched his tongue. Vade's face twisted. He had never liked bitter melon. And this potion tasted like an entire glass of freshly pressed bitter melon juice. Immediately afterward, his body began to flush red. He could clearly feel the potion spreading rapidly into every cell in his body, strengthening both his magic and his physique. The process lasted only a few seconds, yet Vade felt strangely disconnected from reality, as though the passage of time had slowed to a crawl. Suddenly, he drew a deep breath and broke free from that peculiar state, sensing the obvious increase in his magic. A faint smile appeared on his face. He was now a Sequence 8 clown. Notably, a progress bar had appeared on the Card of Blasphemy, seemingly displaying the potion's digestion progress point. 15%. It was probably the result of yesterday's little joke from fate. Unable to contain his excitement, Vade immediately began testing the abilities of the clown inside his room. First, he stood before the mirror and shifted between different expressions: joy, anger, sorrow, fear, grief, and pain. Each emotion appeared vividly on his face without the slightest flaw. There was no way to tell that any of them were false. He then tested his coordination and balance, performing a series of difficult movements that included backflips and walking on his hands. He confirmed that his agility, speed, and strength had all improved considerably. In addition, his intuition had also become sharper. With all these enhancements combined, Vade was confident that he could now hold his own against an adult in a one-on-one fight. Next, he tested the clown's ability to turn paper into a blade. He took out a sheet of parchment and held it between his index and middle fingers. With a flick of his wrist, the parchment shot forward, sliced a candle cleanly in half, and continued into the wall without losing momentum. Surely they would not charge him for that. Feeling slightly guilty, Vade hurried over and pulled the parchment from the wall. The cut was small enough that no one would notice unless they examined it closely. Vade was very satisfied with the clown's abilities, but What pleased him even more was the increase in his magic. That if his previous magical reserves had been a small puddle, then casting spells had been like draining it through a pipe. A dozen or so spells would have emptied it completely. Now his magical reserves were more like a small pond, several times larger than before at the same time. The pipe had also grown wider, meaning that the power of his spells had increased as well. My current magical level should be comparable to that of an average upper-year student, Vade thought as he lay on the bed. That should be enough to carry him through his first 3 years at Hogwarts. He would not be at the bottom of the class, nor would he stand out as some extraordinary genius. He would remain ordinary, inconspicuous, and safe. His goals for the next 3 years were simple: study hard, earn plenty of money, and steadily advance through the sequences as long as he stayed out of the deadly feud between the boy who lived and the Dark Lord. He was confident that he could keep his head down and survive until the end. To be honest, he was not particularly anxious about advancing through the sequences. The wizarding world faced no threat of an apocalypse. Put simply, as long as he remained alive, he would have plenty of time to advance sooner or later. Sequence 4 would grant him divinity, while Sequence 2 would provide an extraordinarily long lifespan. Before reaching Sequence 4, the wizarding world also possessed plenty of magical means to extend a person's life. That he did not lack time. What he lacked was security. A god who survived long enough to mature was a god. One who died before reaching that point was merely someone else's stepping stone, or a convenient source of experience. Vade understood his position very clearly. He had little strength, few resources, and no powerful family or connections. His only sensible choice was to remain cautious and quietly build his strength. That he had no idea that only yesterday Gellert Grindelwald, the first Dark Lord, had already foreseen his existence and informed Albus Dumbledore, Hogwarts headmaster's office. Dumbledore had not slept all night. He sat behind his desk, carefully examining a large book bound in black dragon hide, its pages made from parchment. This was the Book of Admittance. Created by the 4 founders of Hogwarts, it recorded every child born with magical ability. Each year, Hogwarts used it to determine which students would receive acceptance letters. Comparing the information in the Book of Admittance, Dumbledore eliminated one name after another. He believed that Grindelwald would not deceive him. His most urgent task was therefore to identify the fool. At present, he had no real clues, whether pure-blood, half-blood, or muggle-born. Any young witch or wizard possessed countless possibilities for the future. However, analyzing their family circumstances, personalities, and magical talents could still provide useful insight. For example, students raised in Death Eater families who possessed unpleasant personalities and poor magical talent could be excluded immediately. Their future achievements would likely be limited. Avoiding a life of crime would already be an accomplishment for them. As for the remaining students, anyone who met even one of Dumbledore's criteria was added to a list of children worth watching. The future of the entire world might depend on this. He could not afford to gamble, nor did he dare to. The child who deserved the most attention was Harry Potter, the savior of the wizarding world and a young wizard whom Dumbledore had watched for 11 years. Both of his parents had been members of the Order of the Phoenix, giving him an impeccable background. He had spent 11 years living under the roof of his aunt and uncle, yet had not developed any obvious resentment. His talent was also exceptional. Although he might not be a once-in-a-century genius, with careful guidance and a few fortunate opportunities, it was not impossible for him to become the fool. This year happened to be Harry Potter's first at Hogwarts. Grindelwald had also happened to receive his new vision at exactly the same time. Could that truly be nothing more than a coincidence? Dumbledore took out a sheet of parchment and wrote down the names of the children he believed deserved closer attention. Harry Potter was placed at the top. Coincidentally, Vade Moria's name was also on the list. Vade suddenly shivered and broke free from his meditative state. Why do I feel as though something unpleasant has just happened? He frowned, but did not take the feeling too seriously. He had only just entered the wizarding world. Even if something bad had happened, it was unlikely to have anything to do with him. After reassuring himself, Vade entered the washroom, splashed cold water over his face, and left his room. It was now noon, and the leaky cauldron was crowded with customers. Vade greeted Tom before entering the kitchen. His cooking skills were nothing extraordinary. He only knew how to prepare a few simple home-cooked meals, but they were still far better than the food served at the pub. Beef and potato stew, sautéed prawns with broccoli, and a steaming bowl of rice made up his simple lunch for the day. the plates and bowls floated out of the kitchen and hovered beside Vade, releasing an enticing aroma. "Tom, have you finally hired a new cook?" Merlin's beard. "You actually decided to hire someone. What did he make? Bring me a serving as well." Several customers immediately tried to place orders. Tom rolled his eyes at them. "The boy made it for himself. Asking me won't do you any good." "It looks decent," Tom added. "I was half expecting you to blow up my kitchen." Vade smiled and shrugged. Ignoring the curious looks from the other patrons, he ordered a butterbeer, found an empty table, and quietly began eating. Chapter 9: Spirit Vision Must Not Be Used Carelessly. After advancing to Sequence 8, Vade did not immediately begin acting as a clown. Instead, he focused his attention on studying the Standard Book of Spells, Grade 1 by Miranda Goshawk. This was one of the first-year textbooks. It contained the Unlocking Charm, the Levitation Charm, the Knockback Jinx, the Wand-Lighting Charm, the Fire-Making Spell, the Mending Charm, and many other spells. For a first-year student, attempting to learn magic without a teacher's guidance was both difficult and dangerous. A single mistake could easily result in injury. However, Vade was not merely a wizard. He was also a Sequence 8 Beyonder. His heightened spiritual intuition and keen instincts helped him avoid danger, making it relatively easy for him to teach himself a few simple spells. Moreover, after spending the past 11 years continuously training his spirituality, he had become extremely proficient at controlling magic. At the very least, when it came to wandless magic, his natural talent was exceptional. Of course, casting with a wand was simpler, smoother, and consumed less magic than casting without one. Even so, wandless magic could be kept hidden as one of his trump cards. As expected, I really am a genius. Vade gently polished his wand and made a decision. Unless absolutely necessary, he would not reveal his ability to perform wandless magic. He would also need to conceal his magical talent. It was best to appear perfectly average, neither exceptionally gifted nor noticeably poor. He did not neglect his other subjects either. A history of magic, magical theory, a beginner's guide to transfiguration, 1,000 magical herbs and fungi, magical drafts and potions, fantastic beasts and where to find them, and the dark forces, a guide to self-protection. The books were piled on the table, and Vade spent more than half of every day studying them. Without realizing it, he was gradually becoming an outstanding student. The book that surprised him most was Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. It contained detailed records of numerous magical creatures, including their habitats, temperaments, and danger classifications. His intuition told him that the book would help him locate many ingredients suitable for Beyonder potions. It had been published in 1927, and its author was Newt Scamander. It was already 1991, so Vade had no idea whether the man was still alive. Should Scamander still be living, Vade would have to find an opportunity to meet him. Time passed quickly, and soon it was late July. As usual, Vade was eating downstairs at the Leaky Cauldron, though his gaze occasionally drifted toward one particular man. Quirinus Quirrell. He was a timid-looking man with a thick turban wrapped around his head. Vade did not know much about Harry Potter's story. Before being reborn, he had only watched the first 3 films and had not paid particularly close attention. However, he vaguely remembered that this man would become Hogwarts' Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, and that the remnant of Voldemort's soul, the story's main villain, was attached to him. Vade should have kept his distance. However, he could not suppress his curiosity and activated spirit vision to examine him. With a single glance, Vade felt a bone-chilling cold spread throughout his body. Quirrell's hands and feet appeared red, his heart green, his abdomen alternated between orange and yellow, and his throat was blue. His entire body was surrounded by white light. These were all signs of good health. However, when Vade's gaze reached Quirrell's head, the healthy purple aura that should have been there was contaminated by a layer of darkness as black as ink. The black aura resembled a venomous serpent. Although weak, it was extraordinarily sinister and emitted a piercing chill. At that moment, the black aura suddenly churned. Vade felt as though a red-hot needle had been driven into his skull. The indescribable agony nearly made him cry out. He hurriedly deactivated spirit vision. Only then did the pain recede like the tide. When he recovered, he discovered that the back of his robes had been soaked through with sweat. Until I reach a sufficiently high sequence, I can't use spirit vision carelessly. Ordinary wizards might not notice anything, but powerful ones are another matter. Vade silently warned himself. Had Voldemort not been so weakened, that single glance would have been nothing less than an attempt to get himself killed. I felt someone spying on us. A hoarse voice suddenly sounded inside Quirrell's mind, causing him to tremble. Who was it, Master? Quirrell asked cautiously in a whisper that only he could hear. How should I know? But whoever it was must be nearby. Find them and kill them. We cannot allow anyone to interfere with our plans. Quirrell looked around at the crowded pub and his face twitched. That was easy for Voldemort to say, but how was he supposed to find the culprit among so many people? He could hardly kill everyone. Even if he tried, he would not stand a chance against all of them. Master, could you give me some sort of clue? Useless fool. How did I end up with someone as incompetent as you? Voldemort cursed angrily. Look for whoever seems unusual. Find the person who stands out the most. Quirrell nodded nervously. His gaze moved from left to right as he carefully examined every person in the pub. Noticing his actions from the corner of his eye, Vade's heart tightened. Ignoring the damp, uncomfortable feeling against his back, he immediately adjusted his posture and expression. He pushed the clown's control over facial expressions and body language to its limit. Sure enough, Quirrell's gaze passed over him without pausing and moved on to the next person. Master, I haven't noticed anything unusual. Could it be that you were mistaken? Are you questioning me? Creak, the pub door suddenly opened. A giant of a man, 2 or 3 times the size of an ordinary person, entered with a nervous young boy beside him. You're here, Hagrid. The usual? Tom called. Can't, Tom. I'm on Hogwarts business today. Hagrid patted Harry on the shoulder. I'm helping young Harry buy his school things. Tom paused and stared at Harry Potter in astonishment. He could not help exclaiming, Bless my soul. Harry Potter. The chatter filling the pub abruptly stopped, leaving the room completely silent. Almost everyone turned to look at the bespectacled boy with a lightning-shaped scar on his forehead. Welcome back, Mr. Potter, one customer said excitedly as he stepped forward and shook Harry's hand. Welcome back. Harry was still at a loss when a gray-haired witch tightly grasped his hand. Doris Crockford, Mr. Potter. I can't believe I'm finally meeting you. It's such an honor, Mr. Potter. I can't begin to describe how pleased I am. Mr. Potter. Vade joined the crowd, his excitement plainly visible. I've heard your story. I never expected to meet you before the start of term. His excitement was genuine. Quirrell had clearly sensed that something was wrong, and Vade had no idea whether his disguise would hold. However, the moment Harry Potter arrived, the perfect person to take the blame appeared. Vade had never intended to become involved with the boy who lived, but right now he could not have been more grateful. Are you going to Hogwarts too? Harry asked. Just like you, I'm starting my first year. My name is Vade. Vade Moria. Vade behaved like an excited fan meeting his idol. After shaking Harry's hand, he hurried eagerly up the stairs, using the opportunity to escape Quirrell's line of sight. Chapter 10, A Fortune-Teller's Prerogative. Harry Potter. Quirrell approached, looking both excited and nervous. His words came out in a stammer. Can't begin to express what an honor this is. Hello, Professor. Nearly didn't see you there, Hagrid said before making the introduction. Harry, this is Professor Quirrell. He teaches defense against the dark arts at Hogwarts. Pleased to meet you. Harry held out his right hand. Quirrell looked overwhelmed by the gesture. He clasped his hands together. Too uneasy to shake Harry's hand. A fascinating and frightening subject, Quirrell mumbled, deliberately ignoring Harry's outstretched hand. Not that you need to learn it, Potter? Well, we'd better be going. Lots to buy, Hagrid said with a laugh. Goodbye. Hagrid led Harry past the bar and toward the small courtyard that opened into Diagon Alley. Master, Quirrell whispered under his breath, I think the person you sensed earlier may have been Harry Potter. This time, Voldemort did not dismiss the possibility. 10 years ago, he had failed to kill the boy. Instead, his body had been destroyed, leaving him to cling to life like a wandering spirit. Now that they had met again after 10 years, it would not be surprising if he had sensed something unusual in advance. Master, I don't understand. Why did you stop me just now? He is still protected by that ancient magic. I cannot touch him, and since I am attached to you, neither can you. But once I obtain that object, I will be able to rebuild my body and return to life. Quirrell nodded without fully understanding and returned to his usual timid manner. Meanwhile, Vade returned to his room and changed into dry clothes. A faint sense of urgency had taken hold of him. Keeping a low profile and quietly building his strength was important, but having the power to protect himself was just as essential. A single glance from Quirrell had made his skin crawl and nearly caused him to reveal himself. Had Vade been strong enough, he would not have been reduced to such a sorry state. He might even have dared to glare back. But at present he was still insignificant. He had a long way to go before he could truly call himself powerful. Besides studying magic, I need to begin acting as a clown and digesting the potion ahead of schedule, Vade thought as he focused his attention on the card of blasphemy. Although his performance moments ago had been rather undignified, it had still helped him digest a small portion of the clown potion. There was something else that concerned him. When he shook hands with Harry Potter, the card of blasphemy had also reacted. Harry Potter's blood could apparently substitute for one of the supplementary ingredients of the Sequence 5 potion. The protagonist truly lived up to his reputation. A Sequence 5 supplementary ingredient was worth 1,000 galleons, more than twice Vade's entire fortune. He felt slightly guilty about it, but he had already made up his mind that in the future, he would have to find some way to make the boy who lived shed a little more blood. As the days passed, Vade began preparing for the start of term. In addition to packing everything on the Hogwarts list into his trunk, he bought a deck of tarot cards. Finally, he checked out of the leaky cauldron with Tom. Of the 50 galleons he had paid in advance, only 3 galleons and 14 sickles remained by the day before term began. Combined with the money he already had on hand, he possessed fewer than 70 galleons in total. Vade felt an urge to visit Gringotts and withdraw more money, but after considering it carefully, he suppressed the thought. The Sequence 8 potion could not be fully digested in a short period of time. Until then, there was no point in carrying more money because he had nowhere useful to spend it. Besides, Hogwarts had holidays. He could always return to Gringotts during a school break without wasting much time. September 1 St. After breakfast, Vade took his trunk and traveled to King's Cross Station. After getting out of the taxi, he followed the crowds through the station, passing one platform after another until he reached the barrier between platforms 9 and 10. Just then, he saw a couple and a young girl walk straight through the dividing wall. The people around them appeared not to notice anything at all. Found it, Vade murmured with faint excitement and walked directly toward the barrier. The solid wall seemed not to exist. Vade passed through a moment of darkness, then emerged on the other side. A deep scarlet steam engine stood beside the platform. A sign on it read, Hogwarts Express, 11 o'clock. The place where the barrier had been was now a wrought iron archway, with a sign above it displaying platform 9 3/4. Thick smoke drifted over the crowd. Conversations mingled with the rumble of trunks being dragged across the platform, creating a tremendous din. Vade looked at the older students and his future classmates without the slightest ripple of emotion. He boarded the train directly and found an empty compartment. After putting away his trunk, he sat down, stretched, and quietly admired the view outside. That moment, a sudden impulse struck him. He took out his tarot cards. Since it was his first day of school, it seemed appropriate to perform a divination for himself. After shuffling and cutting the deck, he drew 3 cards according to his intuition and placed them in a row. The result was thought-provoking. A hopeful beginning, but with the possibility of an unexpected event that could cause matters to slip beyond his control. Divination isn't infallible, Vade said casually. As a qualified fortune-teller, he had every right to believe only the part he wished to believe. A hopeful beginning, with no unexpected events. Excuse me, is anyone sitting here? A familiar voice came from the doorway. Vade instinctively turned his head and suddenly felt the clown potion digest a little further. Oversized clothes, broken spectacles, and a conspicuous scar on his forehead. Who else could it be but Harry Potter? Harry thought for several seconds before a smile suddenly appeared on his face. Moria. No, I'm not. Don't come in here. Turn around and leave, Vade screamed inwardly. Before he could think of an excuse to send Harry away, however, the boy carried his trunk into the compartment and casually sat opposite him. Now Vade could hardly say anything. I didn't expect to see you here, Harry said happily. Finding someone familiar aboard the train made him feel remarkably fortunate. Although he was the famous savior of the wizarding world, Harry himself felt that he hardly deserved the reputation. His unfamiliarity with both magic and the wizarding world left him with an unconscious sense of inferiority. Being with someone he already knew allowed him to relax. I didn't expect it either. A smile appeared on Vade's face, though inwardly he wanted to weep. He had overdone his performance at the leaky cauldron. He had brought this entirely upon himself. Divination might not be infallible, but it was still disturbingly accurate. What had he done to deserve sharing a compartment with Harry Potter? Now he could only hope that nothing went wrong during the sorting ceremony. Above all else, he must not be placed in Gryffindor. Tarot cards. Were you performing a divination? Yes. Vade did not deny it. He merely gathered the tarot cards and put them away. I have some talent for divination.
If you want to enjoy the rest of the chapters, go to my Patreon. Link is in the first pinned comment.